Good afternoon. It's noon Friday Pacific time, and welcome to Relentless Learning. We do this every Friday at noon. I'm glad that you've been able to join us today, and I'm looking forward to having a good show today with my guest, Brad Nelson. For those of you who are not familiar with Relentless Learning, just a quick recap of how the thing's going to work here for the next 45 minutes or so. Every week, we come together and we talk about two what I call big ideas. And the big ideas for me, you've probably heard me say this before if you've been listened to the show, is the aha moments that we have in our lives. And for me, an aha moment is a time when we see the world differently, we think about the world differently, and things start to fall in place. And I know you all have had those aha moments before in your life. They help unlock big things in our lives and help us to be more productive, more optimal, whatever, more successful in life. So this week, Brad Nelson is going to join us, as I said, in a little bit. He's going to talk about the ability to continuously deliver software. Why shouldn't we also be continuously planning? I love the topic. It's something that I talk about a lot, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Brad on that. And I'm going to talk about getting better equals getting uncomfortable. Next week, even though it's Friday, it's going to be the Friday after Thanksgiving. We will be here. I do have a guest who's going to join us. Hopefully you can join us. I know that some of you will have the day off. Maybe you're going to do a little Black Friday shopping. Come on back later in the day. Join us. I'm going to have Llewellyn Falco with us. Llewellyn is a great guest. I've known Llewellyn for some years now. I've had the wonderful good fortune of working with him. He's going to present systems thinking, shared versus split pain. I guarantee that you're going to want to hear what Llewellyn has to say, because he has, as far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest minds in this field around Agile, responsible for, or at least partially responsible for, this thing that we call mob programming and other things. I'm going to present Apke's first law of Agile transformation, for those of you who are not familiar with Apke's laws of transformation. This Relentless Learning is sponsored by the VUCA MBA. The VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's what the world is becoming, more so all the time. MBA doesn't mean that you're going to get a master's of business. It means that you're going to get a mindset for business agility. I'm a big believer that the mindset matters. It's really interesting. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and I'm sure some of you folks are. There's a lot of folks say that mindset doesn't matter, or it's not as important. I have to disagree with them on that. A couple things about the VUCA MBA. I provide that for companies, but I've decided to try to present it to the general public. So I have scheduled from December 12th through 14th a class for the general public. It is an interesting 3-day training that's based on this Agile MBA that I've already tested and given to over 4,000 people across the world over the last 7 years. So I think it's something that people find immense value in. It's only $300. If you are one of the first 25 people to sign up, it's only $250. There's a bunch of links that I want you to all to be aware of, and I've put them into the comments. I do that every week. There's a link to the class, my website, my email. If you like the Relentless Learning and you want to be reminded of it on a weekly basis, you can join our mailing list. There's all kinds of different things. You can even get on my calendar. I am very passionate. I love talking about Agile related things. So I think some of you might want to get on my calendar. So that's the VUCA MBA. And the VUCA MBA sponsors and kind of pays for the things that we're doing today. I want to move on and talk about what I consider my big idea for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll bring Brad out. I see he's chilling out in the green room. Getting better equals getting uncomfortable. And generally when I have a big idea, one of the things that's important is that I have some kind of thesis that I want to present to you and just briefly defend. And if I had the thesis for today, that thesis is that human success is not just striving, but optimizing. I talk a lot about optimizing. I don't like to talk about right or wrong. I like to talk about optimal decisions. I like to talk about how can we be the best that we can be. Unfortunately, as human beings, our instinct most often leads to something that has been referred to as satisficing, which is a term that was coined by Herbert Simon, who was a Nobel Prize winner. Satisficing is something that combines the satisfactory and sufficient. So we tend to accept something that is less than optimal. And this is part, I'm going to argue, and I think it's true, it's part of our evolution as human beings. This is just what we do. It doesn't make sense, though. If we're looking for optimization, if we're looking for true success, then we cannot always live in this world of satisficing. We cannot just do what is sufficient and satisfactory. We have to challenge that on a regular basis. We have to, in some cases, embrace discomfort. Now, discomfort is also, to some people, pain, which means that we have to sometimes embrace pain. And that's counterintuitive. We didn't grow as human beings, evolutionarily and through our mental evolution for that. It's something that we have this VUCA world, and in the VUCA world, we have to do different things. We have to experiment. We have to try, which means that we can't always be complacent. And so this term satisficing was pretty interesting. When I came across it, there was a story behind it. And the story behind it was one that came to us from the London, from a strike in London, where they had the London tubes went on strike, and a bunch of people in London had to find new ways to commute to work. And it was an interesting real life experiment. And what they found is this. And I'm going to quote from, there's some links actually to some of these stories in the comments that I put in ahead of time. One of the co-authors, Dr. Ferdinand Rausch from Oxford's Department of Economics, Oxford, right? Smart guy. Got to be a smart guy to get into Oxford. Our findings illustrate that people might get stuck with suboptimal decisions. I love the word because that's the one I would use, because they don't experiment enough. We talk a lot about experimentation in the agile world, in the VUCA world. According to the authors, when folks were forced by the strike to alter and experiment and try different ways of commuting to their work in London, this is in 2014, they found that a high percentage of people, more than they would expect, were able to cut down on their commuting time. So the interesting thing about this satisficing is sometimes we're thrown into it, as these people were in the London tube strike. You're thrown into a situation where you have to do something different. It gets you out of your routine. What I'm going to argue is that we shouldn't wait until the world disrupts us. We should embrace those changes. And no more so than the folks who have spent some time with us. And I know we get some people who are here every week and follow us after the fact because it's on LinkedIn all the time, is AI. AI is disrupting the world. And my guest last week, and I agree, Ian, said, hey, look, let's not wait for AI to disrupt our job. Let's embrace AI. So again, this is a perfect example of modern day embracing change. But I want to go through a couple other stories just to give a little flavor for it. The first one is Tiger Woods. I think most people are familiar with Tiger Woods. He's a very famous golfer. Tiger Woods was always looking for a longer drive. That's the tee shot. He wanted to be able to hit it as far as he could, and gaining 5 to 10 yards could make the difference between, a stroke or two in a game, and that can make the difference between winning or losing a tournament. And he was a very dominant golfer for the young folks out there who might not have seen him. I've seen him play. It's incredible. And he had, and I didn't know it was this many, but he had like 4 or 5 coaches that he used during the 90s and early 2000s who worked with him on his swing to improve it, even though he was the best golfer in the world already. That kind of thing is really, really interesting because the reason I wanted to talk about this topic, I told this story to a group of developers I'm working with in Poland. We were in our retrospective and we talked about, well, we were talking about experiments, and they said, well, I'm not comfortable doing this. I said, yeah, but sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. Even Tiger Woods made himself uncomfortable when he was the best in the world. He made changes to his swing when he was the best in the world just so he could be better, right? So he could be optimal. I like that. He had that quest. Maybe, some people say it was kind of an obsession with him to be the best golfer in the world, to have the longest drive in the world. But he did it nonetheless. And he had to change his swing many times. He had a lot of health concerns. He had to change his swing. He embraced the change, even though he was already the best in the world. I think we all know the story of Michael Jordan. When Michael Jordan walked away from basketball to play baseball. And I don't have this in my notes because I want to talk about another person who did the same thing earlier than Jordan. I don't know if Jordan was familiar with Mike Reed's story. But the interesting thing for me personally, I have a personal connection to both the Mike Reed story that I'm going to tell you shortly and to the Michael Jordan story, because I lived, some of you know, I lived in Scottsdale for almost 25 years of my life, and Michael Jordan ended up playing his minor league ball in Scottsdale. It was quite the sensation, obviously, in Scottsdale when he walked away from a successful basketball career to pursue a career in baseball. Now, it didn't work out great for Michael Jordan as a baseball player. There's no guarantee that when you become uncomfortable, you're going to do something better, right? If you knew the results of an experiment, why even experiment? It's not an experiment. But I wanted to talk about a different person. And again, this is somebody I have a very, very small personal connection with, but it's just, to me, those are interesting, right? And I don't know if you'll find it interesting, but I remember I was with my uncle a long, long time ago. And we were running some errands or something like that. And we stopped by the house of the guy's name is Eddie Shepard. I don't think anybody would know him. He owns some restaurants in Cincinnati where I was from, and I was in Cincinnati at the time. And I was a big country music fan, still I am. And we were in Eddie Shepard's house, and all of a sudden somebody walks in the door, and it was Mike Reed. And I knew who he was. I mean, I was a football player. I talk a lot about football and sports. I knew who he was because I was a country music fan. Because at the time he had just written some #1 hits for Ronnie Millsap, The Stranger in This House, and others, if you're familiar with country music. He wrote those songs. But he was, before he was somebody who eventually was inducted into the I think it's a Country Musicians or Country Songwriters Hall of Fame. He was a football player. And he was one of the best football players that you could find. He was an all-pro. And back in the late 60s, he did what Michael Jordan did. He walked away because he was also a concert pianist. And he walked away from football at the height of his career to become a musician. A lot of people didn't understand it. And it wasn't easy for him. But in his case, it worked out. Because I am sure among a lot of people, and maybe, he's older now and it's been some time. I don't know if he's still active writing music, but he's probably better known for the songs he wrote than for his success on the football field. But he was a Cincinnati Bengal, and I ran into him. He walked in the door. It was great. I got to see him and meet him, but I was excited because he was a country music songwriter and singer. And I was also excited because he was a football player, but I was more excited that he was a country music song. So here's the bottom line, and I'm put a cap on this because I'm running out of time on my big idea here. In this VUCA world we live in, where volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity reign, our instincts are going to push us in the way of satisficing. However, we need to often do, and I gave a talk about this, it was the last week before, we have to do the counterintuitive thing because our intuition doesn't work for this VUCA world. And true success lies in not yielding to the comfort of the adequate, but courageously embracing growth that comes from facing the uncomfortable time and time again. So that's my big idea. I'm always looking at the clock, making sure that I have time, and it is time now for our special guest, Brad Nelson. Brad, we made you small. We're gonna have to make you. There you go. Now you're bigger.
Thanks,
Brad,
Larry.
welcome. I'm glad that you were able to join us today. I know that we actually met because you have a podcast, which is I'm going to talk a little bit about your bio. But that's the reason that we met, and you have it right there, agileforagilists.com. Wonderful podcast, wonderful service to the Agile community. You and your partner's name again?
Drew Drew Potter.
Drew. Right, Drew. So thank you for that, and I'm glad that you're able to join us here. I have on the scroller, you can see if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments, and we'll certainly get to them. So as Brad is making his presentation, if you have any questions for my presentation, any comments that you want to make, just put them in the comments. We'd love to talk to them in a little bit, but I want folks to really, if you get a chance, check out Agile for Agilists. Not even better that if you want to hear me some more, my podcast coming up sometime soon. But Brad is not just a podcast superstar. He's a professional in the world of Agile. You work now at Ford Credit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you have a diverse skill set that you bring to what you're doing, and this is pretty interesting. I'm assuming working with Ford Credit. Talk a little bit about your experience with Agile, Ford Credit, anything that comes to mind, and if you don't mind talking a little bit about your podcast, that would be great as well.
Definitely. Thanks, Larry. Yeah. So before I talk about Ford, I always have to kind of throw out, right, the legal claim. I don't represent Ford. Um, they're not in the business of Agile. They're in the business of cars, as most of you know. So I'm definitely not speaking on their behalf. So I've started at Ford actually only just over 90 days ago. So I'm in a new position there, and I'm helping them with their ability to see the value that they're delivering to um, their customers through their digital platform. And so it's less of, I would say, a direct Agilist role that we tend to think of as an Agile consultant, which I was the last 7 years. I'm actually trying to help them install their tooling, like ProdOps tooling, you can think of, to help them be more agile and to iterate. Prior to that, I come from a company called Insight Enterprises. They are a hardware wholesaler and consultancy, and I was head of, I was a manager over our Western practice of Agilists and product managers. And so I helped people for years in organizations to adopt the Agile mindset and product thinking. But I've done a little bit of everything. I've been a Scrum Master. I've been a developer. I've been a product manager. I've been a designer. I've done QA. I've done just about everything except DBA. Data's black magic to me, and I don't touch it. Um, but yeah, so I've done a little bit of it all. And hearing your story, Larry, and the mention of Tiger Woods always makes me think of Roger Federer, who's kind of the counterpart to Tiger Woods when we think about how people learn and excel in the industry and in their field. And a man named David Epstein has a great book on it called Range, where he talks about the power of being a generalist. And really, it is exactly what you're talking about: learning, iterating, and growing. And the difference is Tiger Woods makes a great story because he was a prodigy when he started, but most people are not prodigies.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are more like Federer, where they do many different things before they decide what it is they want to do, and they challenge themselves and they learn, and it makes them a better person at the thing they want to do because they've experimented throughout their life.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I don't know about you, but it took me a long time to find the world of Agile. When I was graduating from college way back when, it didn't even exist really. To find it at such a late age in my case, I've done a number of things prior to that. I'm assuming, you've done a number of things as well. And I think I would venture to say that you would consider that a plus in your ability to do what you do today, right? I mean, having all the
Definitely.
varied experience and sometimes some, dead ends and blind alleys, but in the end, all that experience is pretty beneficial for us.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. I actually started in lean manufacturing, not by choice, because I went to college to be a developer. And then when I got into it, I was like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. It's not really what I want to do. So while I tried to figure out my life, I worked in the factory to make a living. And at the time, I hated it, and I definitely would not go back to to building parts. But what I didn't know at the time is I learned about lean. A-
Mhm.
And there's so many correlations to lean and agile that I feel have really excelled my career to have that experience that most people don't.
Excellent. We're going to get to your presentation in a second. In fact, you're just going to talk about this idea that you have, which is great. Um, Anything that you want to plug other than your podcast?
No, that's really it. I've presented mostly this year. I think this is the last thing I have on the calendar for 2023. I do present at Code Mash in Sandusky next year, so if you want to check that out. And then your episode that we just recorded is due out at the end of the month, so the week after Thanksgiving. We should have that out so everyone can check out some more insight from you.
Super. So I'm going to get off the stage. I'm going to give you the stage to yourself, and you're going to talk about your big idea about continuous planning, not just continuous delivery. So take it away, Brad. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Oops.
Yeah, so very related to what we were just talking about with Agile and kind of the history of where it comes from. We tend to think back to the Agile Manifesto. However, the gentlemen that went and they created the Agile Manifesto, they had already been working in this way for quite some time. Scrum was older than the Agile Manifesto, which a lot of people don't realize. There's a reason they don't tend to refer to it in a lot of their documentation, as well as Crystal, RUP. There's a bunch of other different frameworks that are out there that existed way before that. But when we really look at iterative and incremental development in its entirety, there's things that trace back all the way to Aristotle, right? So thousands of years. But in the more modern times, a lot of it dates back to Dr. Short, who about 100 years ago invented Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is the scientific method. It's how we iterate. We create a hypothesis, we plan just enough to validate that hypothesis, we do just enough of that work to be able to see what are the results. And when we think about throughout history how we've iterated, NASA has even done half-day iterations in the 50s and 60s. And so iterative and incremental development has been the baseline that we've used prior to what we now think of as traditional phased or waterfall development, which really didn't come to prevalence until the 80s and 90s. But it was based on a paper in the 70s. When we think about that, though, and we think about the technology at the time, a lot of the constraints that went into the planning wasn't just do we understand the situation enough or do we know all the details ahead of time? It was constraints in the technology itself. In order to program something way back in the 50s or 60s, I mean, you're talking those punch cards that they had to put in and out. And it took a very long time to develop. There's a very famous picture of Margaret Hamilton with the giant book, that's like as tall as her, of code that she wrote for NASA. And so it makes sense that something like Scrum, which really started to become popular right before the Agile Manifesto, so in the 90s and so on, looked at an iterative and incremental approach of a month or less. And I think the industry standard right now is 2 weeks. It seems like everyone just kind of defaults to that. And so we're not waterfalling for a year, we're waterfalling for 2 weeks in essence. And it reduces the risk drastically, 2 weeks to a year, but we're still planning and kind of closing the doors for those 2 weeks. You can argue you can bring stuff in or out, but a lot of organizations aren't. And as a coach and a consultant, even those 2 weeks is pretty challenging for a lot of people. A lot of organizations, when you go in, they have legacy code, they have legacy systems that aren't able to iterate that fast. And that's a real constraint, right? We need our technology to enable us to be able to deliver in a 2 week cadence. With that said, with the DevOps movement and a lot of the tooling and technology we have today, we now have the ability to continuously deliver and continuously deploy. And so our ability to code and release to production is now faster than our ability to plan. And so my question for the audience, or the thing that I want everyone to think about, is should we be stopping the flow? Should we be stopping the delivery of value to our customers because we've created a timeline of 2 weeks or a month, whatever your iteration is, that you don't release until then? Right? If we have the ability to push out a change after every single ticket, story, task, whatever it is you work in, would it not be in our best interest to do that so that we can learn from it, so that we can iterate on it, so that we can respond while it's still fresh in our minds, and so that we can start focusing on chasing the value that we're delivering and less on here's our list of tasks we need to create, which in my mind is what happens because we're batching deliveries. And so when we batch deliveries, it just becomes here's my list of things to get done. I'm going to do those, and then I'm going to release them in batch. So there's a lot of benefit that I believe could be gained by switching to, it doesn't have to be a one-on-one, but hypothetically, we'll say a one-to-one ratio. I plan one thing, I develop one thing, I deploy one thing, I look and I see what was the impact of that. So that is my crazy idea that I'm throwing out here. And some people are doing that today already. Kanban is one of the ways that kind of enables that, where you worry less about the constraints or timelines or iterations. You use prioritization and you maximize flow. So, opening the floor for thoughts, challenges, questions.
I appreciate that, Brad. There's a couple things when I was reading your pitch. Every guest they kind of give a pitch of what they're going to talk about, so I know a little bit about what's going on. And I thought about it, and I've felt the same. So I want to. I had a conversation the other day. I have a lot of conversations with people in the agile world. Somebody said, "Well, if we don't do quarterly PI planning, what do you recommend?" And I said, "I recommend continuous planning."
Mm.
And he said, "Well, what about funding and other things?" Continuous planning, quarterly investment. Um, is that something that you would be behind? Quarterly investment in as far as determining where the dollars go, but always planning.
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception in Agile that we hear a lot, that in Agile we don't plan. Right? It's just the Wild West, we do whatever we want. And the reality is we're planning all the time, even if we're working in iterations. But how the practices we do and how we think about it, right? We make it more bite-sized. So if we're doing what I'm proposing with continuous delivery, you would make them even more bite-sized. Instead of waiting for the dish to be full of dishes to wash them, you wash them after every dish.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the mindset. Funding is the other challenge that comes up a lot. I think quarterly funding is interesting. I could see some companies having a challenge with that just because their funding process is not very agile yet.
Mm.
Right? Most companies that I see that are able to successfully adopt agility stop worrying so much about relating each item to a budget, and
Mm-hmm.
they more understand here's our product, here's our investment we're going to make. We're going to be paying for this all year long, and this is the team that we have employed. Here's their salaries, so that is our budget.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I don't know. Maybe we talked about this before offline, but in my most recent job, we did one of the largest, fastest, transitions from project and scope based to product and capacity based. And this is what you're talking about. Do you think it sounds to me, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me what you're saying is if I want to go into continuous planning, there are probably some prerequisites. And I'm assuming that one of these prerequisites is that you move to a product funding as opposed to a project funding. Would you say that's accurate, or is there more that you would say to it?
I would say I agree. I know that there's always exceptions. Someone may figure out how to, in a project world, do it. It seems like that would add a lot of overhead. from my experience with organizations. So yes, I would agree with that. I think how we fund our projects and our teams or our products drastically impacts how we operate.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that how we fund things, money being a huge incentive for most folks,
Mm,
and even money sometimes isn't an incentive, but the prestige of having a bigger budget is motivating for folks. I agree with you. I think it's the biggest thing. I think it's the thing that as agilists that we tend to forget,
mm-hmm.
right? Um, I'm gonna we'll get some questions actually coming in on the chat, so I'm gonna put one up. This is from my friend Charlie. He says, I've been in a more continuous delivery environment in 2 week sprint. How do you keep a feeling or a sense of celebrating progress as a team?
Mm, that's a great question. I think if you have the right culture, you can still celebrate uh, the successes, right? And the successes should be more along the lines of the value we delivered and less of the whole like, oh, we just completed X amount of work. It's a huge shift in people's minds because when we focus on work, there's a lot of bad habits that tend to happen, like late hours and those sorts of things, where we think that we can, rob from Peter to pay Paul by expanding our hours through the day, when the reality is there's only so much productive time a human being has.
Hmm.
And so if we shift to value, then we celebrate when we have achieved the value we're trying to achieve. And so you may iteratively release several times and not see that value. And that's okay. That's the whole point of it, is that we don't really have the answers. Humans are complex. The most complex thing on this planet probably is how a human is going to respond. So, being able to quickly, is this what you want? Is this what you want? Is this what you want? And then once we got it, then you celebrate. That's how I would answer that.
Yeah, and I think that when you change your mind, I am so much in agreement with you. It's pretty crazy. It's like we're sharing a mind right now of value. I think when we do deliver value and we concentrate on value as opposed to effort, um, it makes a huge difference. And when we talk about celebrating or feeling a sense of accomplishment or progress as a team, you're celebrating it all the time. Every
Hmm.
time you deliver something, you have that ability. But I could even foresee, I mean, one of the things that you're talking about sounds to me that I started this by talking about being uncomfortable and being optimal. It sounds to me like you're saying Scrum is too slow. We need to move to a more flow system, and
Hmm.
something that would be akin to Kanban is a more optimal solution. Would you agree or no?
I would agree with that. Yes. I will say we limit Scrum, not that Scrum is necessarily always the limiter, right? We decide what our constraints are, we decide what our iterations are. Scrum doesn't say you can't continuously deliver.
Right,
Scrum also doesn't say you have to wait until the end of the sprint to release,
right.
but that's how we tend to interpret it.
But we do. I mean, going back to your, of course we've got the ability to continuously deliver, but you're going back to continuously plan, and Scrum does limit us. I mean, by definition, we have a sprint planning, and we are
Correct.
planning for 2 weeks at a time, right? Um, when we look at the world of agile, it's a pretty interesting world right now, right? And you get a chance to talk to all kinds of agilists in
Hmm.
your podcast, and I'm sure that this probably comes up from time to time. Um, this concept of safe in PI planning. So I'm going to step in it here for a second, and you can deflect if you want. But I think one of the reasons this becomes a bigger deal is, in some respects, this is my opinion. I just want to know what you feel about it. We are moving backwards in some respects with SAFE because we're going back from a shorter time frame and we're going to a 3 month planning cycle. Um,
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Safe is something I will say in general, right? When you're a public figure, which I'm not saying I'm like the hugest public figure ever, but I'm putting my thoughts out there. I typically try not to poo-poo on anyone, but I will say that I do agree with you in general. The positive of SAFE that I usually say is that it's a reminder that there's a lot of things, a lot of opportunities in our organizations to mature, to be able to do things like continuous planning, continuous delivery. One of my largest complaints about Scrum is they completely ignore the software development part of Agile. They don't talk about the techniques that you need to adopt to truly enable agility in coding. However, I agree a lot with you, especially when we start looking at a quarter. I don't think it's unreasonable to have a quarter planned, knowing that if the reality doesn't match the plan, you change the plan. And that's usually what I say is the difference between something like a traditional project management approach or an agile approach. In project management, if reality doesn't match the plan, you try to figure out, how do I make reality match the plan? What do I have to change to make reality match this plan? Whereas in agile, what we're saying is the plan is a hypothesis. When we learn that that plan is no longer valid, we change the plan. And safe makes it more difficult to do that because you can only do that every quarter.
Right. Yeah, and this is one of the things that kind of bothers me, again, about safe, and I'm kind of in your camp. I mean, for some companies, safe is a better alternative to what they're doing. Um, I'm going to just put it out there publicly. I don't. I think safe is therefore a step along the way. I think the
Mm,
problem is saying safe is some kind of destination. I
correct.
would love to get to continuous planning. Right, I'm with you in that camp. That I don't want to do what I would consider discontinuous planning, which is what I find with safe. But that may be a stepping stone to something else. The problem I have with safe is safe kind of says this is the end.
Hmm.
Right? We're not going to get we're not going to do better than PI planning. And I could be misrepresenting it. And anytime you say safe, 10,000 people are going to jump down your throat one way or another, no matter what you say. So backing off from that, because you talk to a lot of agilists, and I'm hoping there's more. Looking in the comments, I'm hoping there's some more questions. We're getting some good feedback from some of the folks' comments, which I showed up on the screen. Talk about the state of agile now, because I think there's some things that I would consider. I wouldn't say it's in crisis, but I wouldn't say it's as healthy as it was even a year ago. Um,
Definitely.
what do you think about the state of agile today?
I would say definitely not. So I think there's been this thing that's been going on for a while where agile was a buzzword. And whenever something becomes a buzzword, people capitalize on it. And those people don't always truly understand it or have its best interest in mind. And I think that's something we've had happening for a while. Pragmatic Dave back in 2015 said that agile is dead, right? But the ideas and the value and the spirit lives on. And so that's what I would say is I think the spirit still lives on, but I do agree with that. And I think one of the challenges we have is, PMI, once again, they're a process focused organization. And so when they read something like Scrum, they only see the process and they're like, oh, I just have to apply this process over my current process. And now we're agile. Safe is that on crack, right? Like safe has everything defined for you so you can misinterpret everything and you can abuse everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so safe is great because organizations are comfortable with that clarity. And really, when we're moving into an agile way of working, living, thinking, we're really saying we're being vulnerable. We're saying, I don't know this stuff. I don't have the answers. And let's just get that on the table so that we can figure out what the answer is and we can stop getting in our own ways. And when I, as an agile coach and as a manager who was responsible for training coaches, the thing that I usually refer to is Deming said there's only one bottleneck. And we tend to think of that in tangibles. The
Mm-hmm.
bottleneck may be an organization's readiness to adopt agility.
Mm-hmm.
And so something like SAFE, to your point, Larry, may be that stepping stone because that's all they're ready to adopt.
Yeah. And there's a lot of good things in say. I mean, I look at the training that I provided over I've been doing this for a long time in the VUCA MBA, and if you look at some of the materials I'm putting out there, um, you'd find some of the same stuff in the SAFe training.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm with you that people tend to gravitate towards what might be considered the more tangible things, but those aren't really, in my mind, the things that are going to be most, optimal for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a different mindset, then you can bring that mindset to any host of problems, and
Right.
it becomes quite practical, right?
Right.
Whereas showing me how to use Jira is practical, but not practical in the world that we live in, which is this VUCA world.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And
given,
oh, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead, Brad.
I was going to say, and on that, when we think about the comfortability that we have of having the answer, it's about control.
Mhm.
I need to have control of this situation. It goes back to Taylorism. It goes back to a lot of the traditional leadership mindsets we have. Is if they don't feel like they're in control, that's a scary place to be. And we're asking them to give up some control. And right now, with the way the economy is, I know a lot of people have been looking for jobs because if you lose a job, it's hard to find one right now, right? Everyone's tightening their belts because their knee jerk reaction to things aren't going to plan is to impose more control.
Yeah.
And control, I would say, is the opposite of agility.
Right. Well, and it's again, as I would always say, it's counterintuitive. We evolved in a world. We evolved, if you want to take Kinevin as a framework, as imperfect as it might be, we evolved in a world that was rather simple,
Mm-hmm.
at best complicated, maybe but this knowledge work, this stuff that we do today, which human beings working together in teams and trying to be creative, which is what software development is, and most people don't get.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a whole different kind of strategy. But we as humans weren't built for it, so we
Right.
have to do things that are counterintuitive. And this causes us all kinds of problems because the counterintuitive, getting back to what I was saying before, since you brought it there, is uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have to be uncomfortable. I think, anyway, we're in this state of, I'm going to say agile, not agility, because agility is different, but we're in this state in the agile world, the world that we both care pretty passionately about, where whether it's crisis or not. What's the what's the solution? Do you have any idea of solution?
I mean, that's a great question. I I don't necessarily have like I've done this and it's 100% worked because we're in the world we're in, right? So I can't say I changed the world. I do believe it takes passionate people like you and myself and some of the people in the chat to continually remind people that this is what agile truly is. In my mind, saying agile is dead is a cop out.
Mm,
It's saying it's been overtaken, I'm giving up,
yeah.
right? We know what it's supposed to be and we know the value.
Mhm.
It is our job to keep advocating for it. It is our job to be the steward of it and to make it a reality. And so I think the best thing we can do is continue to advocate for it and continue to support each other and teach more agilists.
Got another question from the folks in the crowd. Are there advantages to continuous delivery in terms of helping people see the theory of agile as opposed to tightly gripping the template slash control of 2 week sprint?
100%. If we're changing the focus to value, you're closer to agile. Like that alone, right? If we're like, hey, we're going to see what happens, right? We're also teaching a learning mindset. But when we go back to, what are the things that prevent us from applying agile in our organizations, and we think through the business's lens, they have a fear that I'm going to tell you what it is I need, and then I only get one chance to tell you that. And after I tell you it, whatever you deliver is what I got for, if they're in a waterfall situation, potentially at least a year. And so being able to show that we can deliver something today in an hour, 2 hours, tomorrow, whatever it is, and that we can change it and do it again and again and again is demonstrating the power of agility and getting past that fear and that control.
Looking at time, almost done. Continuous planning, great idea, big idea. Appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Real quick, somebody wants to do, I'm in an organization, I want to do continuous planning as opposed to just continuous delivery. What's the first step? Where do they go?
Where they go? Good question. Um, I think frameworks are a great place to start. They're a poor place to end, which is somewhat what you said. It's what my friend Todd Hallowell, who is the first trainer for FAST, mentioned. So FAST is a framework that you could leverage for this. Kanban is another framework you could leverage to try to get started. So I would encourage those. Otherwise, there's books out there like Continuous Discovery and those sorts of things that can expand on it more than we can in this short time.
Absolutely. And education, education, education. Every Friday at noon Pacific, we're here with Relentless Learning. You can do that. That's a little thing that you can do. We talk about some big ideas and some things that might help you on your way. Brad, I appreciate you being with us today. I know it's Friday before Thanksgiving. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Best of luck. Agile for Agilists. Tell Drew thank you. And I said hi. Any closing words?
Just thank you so much, Larry, for having me. And I mean, you do a lot of these things where you give back for free to the community. So I just want to thank you when we're in the thankful mindset for everything that you do. And I guess my answer should have been, you want to learn more? Reach out to Larry. He'll teach you more.
You can do that too. Thank you. I appreciate the plug. Have a wonderful day, everyone. We'll see you all next week, hopefully. Have a wonderful weekend, wonderful Thanksgiving. Bye bye.